Topic is sequels. I'd like to talk about sequels, especially in the context of what sequels mean now in the year of our Lord 2019. um, this was kind of prompted by I think a pretty interesting read over at PC Gamer. Tyler Wilde wrote a piece, kind of prompted by the announcement of two sequels in particular: Overwatch 2, which we've talked about, and Path of Exile 2. And I think in different yet similar ways, both of these games sort of challenge our concept of a traditional sequel. We talked a little bit about this when we talked about Overwatch 2, just based on our impressions. But I think it's worth noting Overwatch 2 is a sequel in name, but less so traditionally speaking. It is a game in which you can still participate in all the content if you own the original game, all the multiplayer content. The only thing you can't engage with is the story mode content that will come with the sequel. So if you own Overwatch 1 and you play Overwatch 1, love it, have no interest in the story mode, you'll still be able to get most, if not all, of the multiplayer content of Overwatch 2. And so games like this sort of, I mean, the evolution of games in live service we've talked about a lot. It's not exactly a new development, but I think we're seeing a lot fewer sequels come out in this space. And when they do come out, you see a lot of hubbub from fans saying, why is this a sequel? Why is this not just part of the original game? This happened with Destiny. It even happened to a lesser degree with Overwatch. And so I kind of just want to talk about what sequels mean now. What does it mean to make a sequel in an age where games never really end? And I don't really have a bunch of general questions, but I kind of just want to talk about generally what this means. Like, what does it mean to be a sequel at this point if you're a live service game?
Yeah, I think companies, Destiny being really the prime console example of a game that I think a lot of people looked at and saw, oh damn, they had a really hard time restarting essentially with Destiny 2. And you know, one of the main complaints when Destiny 2 was announced was, wait, I've spent 3 years with this character in Destiny 1, and you're telling me that when I bring him over, I'm going to get like, what, a shader and some sort of emblem, but nothing else beyond that? Like, can't bring over any of my inventory. I have to start from level 0 again. And it took Destiny 2 quite some time, and I still don't think it ever reached the success points of the original Destiny. Like, at no point was Destiny 2 as successful as the heyday of Destiny 1. Is that probably accurate?
In terms of player numbers?
Yeah, in terms of player numbers, engagement.
Yeah.
So
I think quality-wise, it's arguably better than Destiny 2, but I think you're right. The sheer amount of people engaging with it did not reach the highs of Destiny 1.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, that's what a company cares about, is the engagement of it. And so, and with Destiny 1, you think about all of the major expansions that came out over the 3-year life of the game. It felt like you were getting a new release of Destiny each and every year. And so it made it make even less sense when Destiny 2 came out, and it was like, okay, so I'm getting new Crucible maps, new story missions, new cutscenes, all this sort of stuff. But the thing that I play Destiny for, which is my character, does not come along with me. And like that left people in the community feeling a bit abandoned by the game that they dedicated themselves to. And with Overwatch 2, similarly, that was something that they really tried to get out ahead of, was continue with the multiplayer, and all of the skins, all of the stuff you've worked for 3 years to obtain, that stuff is going to carry over with you to Overwatch 2. And so I think that's a lesson that's being learned here. But as long as new content is constantly being pushed out for these games, there's really no natural breakpoint to say, all
Yeah.
right, here's the next thing, when it's like, well, you could just push this in a patch and I can pay $30 for it and download it into my existing game.
I expressed this back during the Overwatch discussion, but I'm in the boat of I have a hard time viewing it as a sequel. And Overwatch is such an interesting example because nothing changes on the multiplayer front. It's just the addition of a campaign, which arguably is the definition of an expansion. You're just adding a component onto the main game, and my game experience does not change if I choose not to buy that. And if I do buy that, the multiplayer experience remains the same as those who don't choose to buy it. And so I'm in the boat of like with the games as services, I think it's pretty hard to make a true sequel. And I'd like to see us move away from that language. And I think it's okay to do that. I looked and looked. I couldn't find this article. We talked months ago. One time my topic was this article this woman had written about her experience in WoW, and she compared games as services to having this place that you go and you hang out with your friends all the time, and over time the place changes, and eventually for some people they stop going, they stop hanging out. It was comparing games to services to real life situations where we have these places where we spend time, and time marches on and they change, and for some of us that's great, and for some of us we move on and find somewhere new to hang out. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just an interesting thing. We're at a place where we can actually have alternate realities where we actually spend time, and those things change like our real life hangouts. But you don't McDonald's doesn't close and turn into McDonald's too. It just adds some kiosks where you can order instead of having to socialize with a cashier.
Yeah.
And that's how I've come to think of these games as services.
Also, I apologize. Feel for real coming in with the resub and the song is playing. He says, did you know you could join the Cafe Crew for free by using your Twitch Prime? Feel for real, thanks so much for the 6 months of a tier 1 subscription.
Oh, nice.
They're awesome. Rest in peace, alerts are on. Apologize, Larry, I cut you off there.
Oh no, I was done making my point.
Perfect timing then, Beal.
I think for a sequel, it has to be something completely new. But when you're steadily marching toward a completely new thing all the time, I don't know when you decide to draw that line.
Yeah, I think that the traditional definition of a sequel is, I mean, when you think about it in more traditional media, it's like a chapter 2. It's like a self-contained continuation of what is going on. I think that it's key to distinguish between a continuation and an extension. And I think an extension is what we're seeing here, where it's taking the foundation and just sort of like bending it this way and bending it that way, as opposed to building a new foundation. And I think it makes it really it makes it weird to talk about, and we'll talk about this in your topic, Luke, but it makes it weird to think about when publications start putting out year-end lists of when a game, I'll use Rainbow Six as an example because that's the one I know, the live service game I probably have the most familiarity with. Rainbow Six Siege is at this point a sequel to what it was at first. Like, games become sequels over time at this point. We just don't call them that. It's the same banner, it's the same entry point. But like the Rainbow Six Siege of 2019 is essentially a different game than the Rainbow Six Siege that launched originally. It is in all intents and purposes a sequel. It's just it doesn't have a 2, which would be kind of weird if you did Rainbow Six Siege 2. That just doesn't roll off the tongue. But the point I'm making is that games now have the chance to evolve into what would be equated as a sequel, and there's no need to slap a 2 or slap a 3 on it. There's no need to rebrand. And as you said, Luke, it just creates an awkward breaking point for the audience, and can be a really isolating experience when they do make that break.
Yeah, well, and I think in order for a sequel to be necessary, there has to have been a time where you put down the original.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, people were playing the original, playing Destiny 1 with all of its expansions the day before the sequel came out, and they hadn't stopped playing it from the time the game had released. And so when you think about games like Uncharted or The Last of Us or God of War, like these games that like, those are games that are great games, renowned games. People talk about them constantly, but you put them down and you walk away from them because you've done everything you can do in it, and you wait a couple of years. It's like, it's like movies, like there's It Chapter 2. If we would have put them together, it wouldn't have been that, like, hey, this is the sequel to It, if we just played them back to back, But that's what we do with games in this weird way, because we're constantly sitting down and engaging with them, and they just roll one right into the other.
Yeah, and they don't want you to stop playing it. There's no incentive for them to get you to stop playing it.
Exactly. But I think another point of this, let's list off all the games that we can think of that kind of fall into this category of, like, why the hell is this a sequel and not just an expansion? There's Destiny. I think people would argue similarly with The Division, despite the fact that it takes place in a new location. Fortnite, in a weird way, has, like, their Chapter 2 kind of reset, and I know a lot of people talk about that kind of like the sequel to Fortnite. There's Overwatch. What other games do we have like this? And I'm sure we're going to be missing some, and if chat wants to help, I don't know if there's, but
I mean, you could argue, I'm trying to think. Those are the ones that come to mind.
Yeah.
All the other live service games have either stuck with it or failed.
But I'm leading to a point here, and it is this: what do all of those games have in common? They have to talk to and justify to investors concepts that they're trying to get across, and get buy-in from them, from people who likely don't understand this concept. And the idea of a sequel within your successful franchise is a lot more attractive than, hey, let's just put out another expansion for these things. So, like, Activision Blizzard, the higher ups, the investors there, are like, oh, fuck, Overwatch 2, we don't need to know the nitty gritty of how this is different from the original. And then when you get down to brass tacks, like you said, Larry, it really is just an expansion. But in their minds, it's like, oh man, this is a sequel. Like, and I guess for the audience in a lot of ways who have fallen out of Overwatch, but that seems to be what the goal is for a lot of these games, and I'm not sure how successful it is. Like, the goal is, oh, well, if we release a sequel, this kind of natural breaking point, we're going to pull people back into the game that are going to get hooked in it again. But I think in reality, those people similarly play the game like they did the original, where we played for 3 months and we got tired of it and moved on to the next thing.
Yeah, and I think companies like Epic have figured out ways to re-engage and reinvigorate its audience without having to release a named sequel that charges you for an additional entry fee. Like, Epic's found a way to keep its audience over time, and I think other games have been able to do that too. I mean, Apex obviously doesn't have the player base, but you always see a surge in terms of streaming numbers and people playing the game when a new season launches. And, like, I don't know if the goal they're after is not. I think the goal they're going after is it can be achieved in other ways without launching and rebranding the game itself.
Yeah, Warframe's another great example.
Yeah, Warframe's a good example.
I think part of how you do that is you start viewing these things like those real life hangout spots. And you make a big deal of the changes, and, like, that's what Epic excels at. They build all this excitement. Like, you show up at the place where you hang out with your friends every night, and hey, there's a little something different. What is that all about? And then you show up one day and the whole thing's gone. It's just a black hole. And then when you come back, it's a brand new world. And I think that every game has some marketing, some advertising behind the expansions that they make, but I don't think a lot of them do a great job. With Destiny, the standout is when they killed Cade, right? They killed Cade in the advertising. But outside of that, like, I never felt like super hyped about, oh, Destiny's got a new expansion coming out. This marketing's really getting me to want to go check it out. And I think part of it is just doing a better job of making those little changes that they're not as big as a brand new game, but help people realize how substantial they are and why it's worth coming and seeing what you've done to update the place.
Yeah, I think the point you make, Larry, is a good one. Talking about these things as kind of like living, breathing, constantly evolving worlds. I do, and I think that the article raises a good point about how because of prolonged engagement and because of such consistent engagement, especially in like MMOs and live service games, it can start to breed a weird form of nostalgia and like longing for a version of the game that no longer exists. And so I think in a weird way, we kind of saw it with the launch of WoW Classic or whatever I think it's called, World of Warcraft Classic, which is like a back to basics version of the game. Obviously not 100% accurate. There's still a few changes, but it's, I guess, close to vanilla WoW as you can get. A lot of my friends engaged with it because they've been playing for 15 years and they remember the game at that point. There's a nostalgia attached and like an inherent kind of place it holds in your heart if you've been playing in this world for 15 years. But it kind of complicates the idea of what it means to preserve games. Like the version of Rainbow Six Siege that I played at will probably never exist again. Now I don't know if I would want that version to exist again, but as a document of where the game was and what the game was, that doesn't exist anymore. And I think that's interesting for how games as kind of historical documents will kind of evolve moving forward.
We'll
like
never be able to play with Bastion with a personal shield in it ever again.
Exactly. You can go back and play all these games on classic consoles, especially now that there are so many emulators and so many reduxes of those but you can play those games as they were. A lot of modern games you can't, and I think that's I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's just kind of interesting.
And 10 years from now, when people feel like they want to go back and play Overwatch, what will that even mean?
Yeah.
It's definitely an interesting question. There was another point I wanted. I also think about a game. Another issue I think that companies are trying to figure out how to thread the needle is just a game like Destiny. There are times where I'm like, man, I really want to get back into Destiny. I love the gunplay. I love the lore. Like, I love the loot grind, but where I feel overwhelmed by the amount of content that I would need to catch up on in order to be even remotely competitive. And I'm not one of those guys who's like, I can use this shard of light to get an extra 20 levels, or like, I don't like the idea of that either. But a game like Fortnite, where the progression is really only attached to cosmetic items, it's something that, hey, I can put down for a year and then decide I want to come back to, or Overwatch similarly. And I may fall behind in terms of, understanding the meta or the mechanics or who new characters are that are being rolled in. There's not just like, hey, you got to get through this 25 hours of additional content in order to get to the level cap, in order to be competitive in Crucible or whatever. Like, and so I think companies are really trying to figure out how do we stay true to our fans and the people who remain engaged, but also leave the window of opportunity open for new players to find an entry point that isn't just insanely overwhelming.
And that gets harder the more games move into games as services. Because you only have so much time to devote to a game.
because they're all like Amazon and Google and Apple. They're like, we don't want people just to play our game. We want people to live in our ecosystem. Like
Exactly.
we want people. We don't want you to be a video game player. We want you to be a WoW player, a Destiny player, a Fortnite player.
For me personally, that's actually the appeal of games like Fortnite. I don't really play Fortnite, but Apex. It is refreshing to me to not have to grind out the weapons. We're all going to drop in with nothing. and only the RNG gods will determine what we fight with.
Do you like dropping into a game at absolute zero? Do you like dropping into a game and praying to RNGesus that he will bless you? Try Teamfight Tactics with me, boys and girls.
I'm sold.
There you go.
Getting off this podcast and downloading it right now.
Fantastic. Gosh.
And he's gone.
Scared you.
All right. Anything else on sequels here?
No, I'm lagging a little bit. If I drop out of this call, will it completely ruin?
Try just turning your camera off and turning it back on rather than dropping completely out.
That is a good idea. Now I am just no face.
There we go. And then it'll reconnect your camera. Should sync you up again.
Yeah, there we go.